Alright, this is our session 3 video, the 5 to 7 minute speech that we're supposed to give for this week. I didn't introduce her last time, but this is my wife. She does exist. I'm not schizophrenic. So yeah, she has the PowerPoint notes with her. So as I go through as I go through this, she can follow along and keep up with what we're going over. But to begin with, apologetics deals with the defense of the Christian faith, and one of the primary aspects of that is the existence of God. Now, this question of whether God exists or does not exist has value and meaning for every single person on planet Earth that has ever lived. And so it's relevant to anyone and everyone, regardless of gender, age, creed. It doesn't matter, or sex. None of that stuff matters. If God exists, then there's the potential that His existence can encroach upon what we can and cannot do, and so forth. It would imply some sort of duty on our behalf to this God. And then there's a whole other question of which God would it be that exists. But for now, I just want to deal with the question of, does God exist? And then later get on to the biblical aspect of it. And then for myself, this I can talk about this, and it means a lot to me because, for one thing, excuse me, getting over a cough still. For one thing, my degree at Colorado Christian University is in global apologetics, and so I'm being trained academically to talk about the defense of the Christian faith in general. Again, one of the key aspects of it being, does God exist? So let's jump right in. As far as preliminary remarks, there are 4 key aspects that His existence or non-existence would really affect as far as the world around us today. And we can use all 4 of those elements or aspects or areas of reality to prove His existence. The first would be knowledge, and I'm just talking about knowledge in general. But more specifically, how do we know the things that we know about reality? And I would say that with starting with knowledge, without God, knowledge is impossible. The Christian apologist, he was a Presbyterian philosopher, Gordon H. Clark, writes, the Christian in the 20th century is confronted with an overwhelming cultural consensus. Man does not and cannot know anything truly. This lack of confidence on man's part is because man has cast off knowledge of God and has therefore lost the thread entirely on everything else. It is only if God exists that we can have a sound foundation for what meaning is. And that leads us into our second part, which is the foundation, that God is the foundation for all knowledge, and the belief that God exists and that He has revealed Himself in the Bible is and must be, for the Christian, our starting point. And we'll get to that, what that exactly means a little bit later on. And then the third point or area of reality would be meaning itself. That without God, life has no ultimate meaning at all. If God does not exist, then we are just accidents of evolution, and there cannot be any kind of ultimate meaning attached to us. And then fourthly would be language itself. That language itself becomes unintelligible without God. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But the atheists would have us believe instead that it should read, in the beginning was chaos, and the chaos accidentally formed the heavens and the earth. So those are the 4 points by way of introduction that we will go over briefly. So let's start with the first one, knowledge. First off, if God exists, man can know something of the world around him if he views life as an ordered creation. Now, if God does not exist and evolution is true, and I'm speaking of atheistic evolution, then you really are forced into the view that all of the supposed and apparent design of reality around you, excuse me, is just an accident. It doesn't have any purpose to it. It doesn't have any meaning or value, and so. One of the things that's really critical in performing the scientific method, just as an example, is that you assume that the laws of nature will hold steadily from one day to the next. That tomorrow, as you walk out of your door, nobody's afraid that tomorrow they're going to walk out of their front door and just float off into the sky because the laws of gravity have just ceased to hold. This is called the uniformity of nature, and without that, all knowledge would be impossible. And you cannot explain the laws of nature holding from day to day by just appealing to an accident, which is what we would have to appeal to if God did not exist. Secondly, as far as knowledge is concerned, it's important to note that neutrality does not exist, that all people, and that includes scientists who would say that they're objective and following the evidence, no such thing exists. Nobody is neutral. Nobody ever is really objective. All people have biases and prejudices when they arrive at a subject. And so, even the scientist who says that he's just following the evidence is actually using his own biases and prejudices to interpret data that he sees around him. And so ultimately, without God, you have no basis for even a starting point for science itself, which is, the starting point of all knowledge. But by saying science, I'm talking about philosophy, the study of history. It wasn't all that long ago that theology was considered the queen of the sciences and philosophy her handmaiden. So all knowledge in general requires a solid foundation underneath it. Otherwise, you have no starting point by which to know anything. And then for the Christian, what then would be your foundation for any kind of knowledge? And our starting point would have to be that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. This is our what you would call an ultimate authority. Without an ultimate authority, you have no starting point for by which to know anything, or to have as a lens through which to view the world itself. And so, for example, atheism or any other secular system has no foundation and no starting point, because when they look at the world, they're just assuming themselves inherently flawed and limited in their viewpoint. The Christian, on the other hand, has the Bible as a starting point. Now, how can you determine that the Bible is a legitimate foundation? And there's been a lot of controversy on this issue. How do you determine the Bible is reliable? How can this be used as a way of looking at the world? Well, I may have already said this, but as far as ultimate foundations are concerned, all religions, all systems of thought have a starting point. That's your ultimate authority. Atheism has it. They would look to man first. Hinduism has it. Buddhism has it. Islam has the Quran. For the Bible, or for Christians, it's the Bible. That's our ultimate authority. And all ultimate authorities presuppose themselves. In other words, they have to refer back to themselves. They have to authenticate themselves. If you have to look to another standard in order to authenticate the Bible, then that's not your ultimate authority. Whatever it is that you're using to authenticate it is then your ultimate authority. So you have to say that the Bible is the Word of God and use a kind of what they would call an internal critique of it in order to know whether it's legitimate or not. So again, just to clarify and emphasize, the Christian has to look at the Bible as their starting point. You can't use secular methods of determining whether something is true or not in order to authenticate the Bible. And then moving on, as far as meaning is concerned, meaning can only be known in an ultimate sense if meaning is preceded or existed, or if it existed prior to creation. If there was no meaning prior to the universe's existence, then it is impossible to say that there is real meaning now. If there is no real meaning now, then meaninglessness must have always been the way things are. And that's actually impossible, as we'll find out when we move on to language. And then moving on to language. For the atheist, and for somebody who says that God does not exist, they would say that in the beginning was a point of singularity or just chaos in general, a point where all the laws of science had broken down entirely, and all there was chaos, and then this chaos erupted by chance. It was devoid of all purpose, and somehow that brought about where we are today. Well, from the point of view of just language itself, that's impossible. Because if you just take some of the words that they're using, you can see that this cannot be the case. So, for example, the word accident, that the world accidentally came into being, would be to suggest that an accident was the first cause, which is impossible, because you can only know that an accident is an accident if you have some idea of design or intention prior to it. And so an accident cannot be your starting point. You would have to have design or purpose as a starting point. The same could be said for chaos. You don't know that something is chaos unless you know how it was supposed to be ordered in the first place. And so you cannot start with chaos. In the beginning, there must have been order, design, and intelligence. Otherwise, we would have no idea. These words like chaos and accident would be utterly meaningless to us. We would have no way of knowing whether something was an accident or chaos or not, because we would have no idea that there would be no such thing as design in the first place. And so the words would mean utterly nothing. The same goes for purpose. You can't know that something is purposeless unless you know that there is purpose in the beginning, or that something is meaningless unless there is meaning in the beginning. And so those things can only be found in a personal transcendent being, i.e. God, in the beginning as the first cause. To suggest otherwise just violates our entire understanding of language in general. In conclusion, as far as knowledge goes, we know that knowledge is only possible if an intelligent God exists. The foundation for that knowledge must be an ultimate authority, the lens through which the Christian views the world is the Word of God, and that can be defended by an internal critique of the Bible itself, rather than referring to or subjecting yourself to the methods of atheistic or secular scientists who assume off the jump that there is no such thing as God, and then meaning and value itself. Without God, all things lose their objective meaning and become trivial accidents of history. And even the word history would have no true meaning without God's existence. The word can be broken down as His story. There is no story if all that is just an accident. Anyway, that's the conclusion of my video. I hope most of you or all of you are able to get something out of it, and I look forward to hearing your critiques. Thank you.